The pool had been Mitchell Chen's pride and joy for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. He knew this because he'd marked it on the calendar in his home office with blue ink. The day the contractors finished. The water, that electric turquoise blue that only happens in those first pristine hours before a pool truly becomes lived in. He'd spent $17,000 on this pool. Every penny had been earned through his landscape architecture firm. Every penny justified by the promise of weekend relaxation, of having friends over during the summer, of sitting on his back patio with a book and a cold drink while the sun set over the valley. That promise had lasted approximately 4 months. It started in late May, the first time Mitchell noticed wet footprints leading from the back fence to the pool and back again. He'd stood there in his boxer shorts at 6 in the morning, coffee in hand, staring at the wet concrete like it was evidence at a crime scene. Which technically it was. Someone had broken into his yard. Someone had used his pool. He told himself it was probably just the neighbors' kids. Maybe they'd gone for a midnight swim, thought no one would notice. He bought a new lock for the side gate. Problem solved. Except it wasn't. 3 weeks later, he found a beach towel. A child's beach towel, cartoonish dolphins printed on faded yellow cloth, left draped over his lounge chair. The water in the pool had that peculiar cloudiness that comes from chlorine that hasn't been balanced in a day or two, which meant someone had been swimming recently. Very recently. Within the last 24 hours. Mitchell had called the non-emergency police line. They sent an officer who looked sympathetic but not particularly invested. "Kids being kids," the officer had said, examining the fence. "Your lock's not terrible, but a determined teenager could probably—" He'd made a sliding motion with his hand. "You could invest in motion sensor lights. That usually deters them." Motion sensor lights, $700 worth. Mitchell had them installed on a Wednesday afternoon. They were tripped 4 times the following Saturday night. He'd run outside both times, barefoot and heart-hammering, and found nothing but disturbed water and the faint scent of chlorine hanging in the humid night air. The 3rd and 4th times, he'd stayed inside, watching from his bedroom window as the lights blazed and then clicked off, like someone was deliberately toying with them. By early July, Mitchell had stopped being angry. Anger required energy. What he felt now was something deeper and more corrosive, a sense of violation that never quite faded. His own home, his own property, a space he designed and paid for and maintained meticulously, and it belonged to him in every legal sense except the one that mattered, the actual physical ability to keep people out. He installed a security camera system. 4 cameras, one on the house pointing at the pool area, one on the fence line, one on the gate, one angled at the back patio. High resolution, cloud storage. He could check it from his phone from anywhere. The first usable footage came 3 days after installation. 2 children, a girl who looked about 11 and a boy who looked maybe 9, scaling the fence with the casual competence of practice. They weren't running. They weren't being furtive in any sophisticated way. The girl was actually laughing, her head thrown back, as the boy struggled with the climb. Mitchell had watched that 15 seconds of footage 17 times. He reported it to the police again. He filed a report this time, gave them the footage, and used the word trespassing very deliberately. The same officer came out, and this time he seemed slightly less sympathetic. He explained that without knowing who the kids were, prosecution would be difficult. Mitchell needed to catch them in the act, or get a clear shot of their faces, or ideally get them to admit they'd been on his property. "You could post signs," the officer had suggested. "Private property, no trespassing, make it official. That actually helps with the legal side of things." Mitchell had the signs installed the next morning, large, yellow, impossible to miss. "Private property, no trespassing, surveillance in effect." The kids came back that same night. Now in the 3rd week of July, Mitchell sat at his kitchen table at 1 in the morning, watching his security cameras on his iPad, watching 2 children, different ones this time, or maybe the same ones, he couldn't quite tell from the grainy footage, splash and play in his pool like they owned it. The boy did a cannonball that sent water cascading over the edge. The girl, blonde, he could see that much, was diving deep, her body a perfect arrow cutting through the water. Mitchell's hands shook as he looked up their phone number. He knew where they came from. After the first few incidents, he'd walked the neighborhood, retracing the route that would be easiest from the surrounding streets. There was a cul-de-sac 3 streets over, a development called Sunrise Hills that had probably been built in the 1990s. Family homes, kids everywhere. One block had a house with a "World's Best Mom" sign in the yard and a minivan in the driveway. He'd noted the address from the mailbox, checked the county records online. The owner was registered as Corinne Williams. He'd also seen her son, tall kid, maybe 14, with the kind of athletic build that suggested organized sports. He'd seen her getting mail. She had blonde hair like the girl in his pool footage. The resemblance was clear. Mitchell had decided 3 weeks ago that he would not approach this civilly. He'd done civil. He'd done polite. He'd done installing $700 lighting systems and security camera arrays and signs that cost nearly $1,000 total. He'd done the police. Now it was time for something else. His phone was already open. The number was already in his contacts. He'd looked it up days ago, had written it down, had practiced what he'd say. Now, at 1 in the morning, with children still swimming in his pool, Mitchell called. The phone rang 5 times before a woman answered, her voice thick with sleep and instant confusion. "Hello? Is this Corinne Williams?" Mitchell asked. A pause. "Who is this?" "My name is Mitchell Chen. I live at 4447 Marywood Drive. Your children have been trespassing on my property and using my pool without permission for the last 2 months. It's 1 a.m. They're in my pool right now. I'm going to give you exactly 10 minutes to come collect them before I call the police and file charges for breaking and entering." Silence then. What, my kids are asleep there." "They're not," Mitchell said, and he kept his voice absolutely level, absolutely calm. "I have them on video. I have 4 weeks of footage. I have security cameras, so you have 10 minutes. 4447 Marywood Drive. The gate is unlocked." He hung up. For a moment, just a moment, he felt a surge of something clean and bright, something almost like relief. He'd finally acted. He'd finally done something. Then he went back to his iPad and watched the footage again. The girl was climbing out of the pool now, shaking water from her hair. The boy was still in the water, floating on his back, staring up at the stars. They looked happy. Genuinely, purely happy in the way that only children who had no idea they were about to get caught could possibly look. Mitchell kept watching. He set a timer on his phone for 10 minutes. He waited. 8 minutes and 30 seconds later, he heard the sound of an engine, a car door, feet running across his back patio. Then a woman's voice, Corinne, he assumed, shouting her children's names with a fury that even through the thickness of the walls and windows was unmistakable. Mitchell sat at his kitchen table and listened to his backyard explode into chaos. And despite everything, despite the violation and the intrusion and the months of sleepless nights, he felt something complicated bloom in his chest that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was close enough to it that in the darkness, he couldn't tell the difference. He'd acted, now everything would change. He just didn't know how much yet. Corinne Williams appeared at Mitchell's front door the following Saturday at 10 a.m., and Mitchell's first thought was that she looked exactly like the kind of person who would name her child's swimming hours something other than trespassing. She was in her mid-40s, still in excellent shape, with the kind of blonde highlights that required regular maintenance and the kind of posture that suggested yoga classes at some boutique studio downtown. She wore yoga pants and a designer tank top, and her face had that particular configuration of fury and forced civility that comes from a parent who has been coached on the phone to appear apologetic while secretly believing they've done nothing wrong. "Mr. Chen," she said, not quite making it a question, "I'm Corinne Williams, about my children and your pool." "I'm going to stop you right there," Mitchell said. He'd been waiting for this moment since the previous night, rehearsing it, perfecting it. "I don't think you understand how serious this is." Corinne's eye twitched, barely perceptible, but Mitchell caught it. "My children made a mistake," she said, each word measured and deliberately calm. "They went swimming in your pool without permission. I understand that was wrong. I came here to apologize and to talk about how we can move past this, as neighbors." The way she said neighbors made it sound like a threat. "Move past it," Mitchell repeated. He hadn't invited her inside, was still standing in his doorway, the sun bright behind him. "Corinne, may I call you Karen? Your children didn't just come here once, or twice. They've been trespassing on my property for 2 months. I have 43 separate incidents documented on video. That's not a mistake, that's a pattern." "They're kids. They're old enough to know better," Mitchell interrupted. "And frankly, I suspect they knew better the first time. I suspect they knew they were breaking the rules and they did it anyway, and I suspect you knew, or at least suspected, and you didn't stop them." Corinne's face flushed. This close, Mitchell could see the small lines around her mouth, the slight looseness at her jaw. She was aging quickly, or perhaps she'd never been as young as she tried to appear. I absolutely did not know. I had no idea. The night I called you, they were in my pool at 1 in the morning, Mitchell said. On a school night, supposedly asleep. So either you're a very light sleeper who caught them in the act, or you're not paying much attention to where your children are. He watched her jaw clench, watched her hands curl into fists at her sides. I came here to apologize, Corinne said, and now there was steel in her voice. I came here in good faith. My children have already been punished. They're not allowed outside except for school for a month. They've lost their phones. I came here to try to make this right. The least you could do is accept that. I can see you're upset, Mitchell said, and he heard the edge in his own voice now, the satisfaction that comes from having the upper hand. But upset doesn't undo months of violation. Upset doesn't undo the $17,000 I spent on this pool or the money I've had to spend on security systems. Upset doesn't give me back the peace of mind in my own home. Are you threatening to press charges? Corinne asked. I'm explaining why I have every right to, Mitchell said. I haven't decided yet. I'm going to think about it. In the meantime, I strongly suggest your children find somewhere else to spend their time. Corinne stood there for a moment, her chest rising and falling with controlled breathing. Mitchell could see her working for composure, could see the moment she realized that she'd lost, that whatever she'd come here hopping to accomplish wasn't going to happen. You know, she said quietly, I tried to do the right thing. I tried to come and apologize and make amends. A good person would have accepted that. A good person wouldn't have raised children who thought it was acceptable to invade their neighbors' homes, Mitchell replied. He closed the door, not slammed it. That would have been too theatrical. Just closed it quietly and finally and watched through the peephole as Corinne stood on his porch for another 10 seconds before turning and walking back to her car. Mitchell felt clean, vindicated, righteous. He didn't examine why, in the days that followed, this feeling kept slipping through his fingers like water. The first sign that something was wrong came on Tuesday morning. Mitchell was getting coffee at his local Starbucks before heading to his office when he overheard two women talking in the line behind him. Can you believe that guy? One of them was saying, calling her at 1 in the morning like some kind of psycho. I heard he set it up, the other woman said, like specifically to catch them so he could call their mom in the middle of the night. Mitchell's hands went cold around his coffee cup. He turned slightly, tried to catch their eye, but they were already looking away, already pretending they hadn't been speaking about him. How did they even know? How had this gotten around the neighborhood so quickly? He found out approximately 4 hours later when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a post on the neighborhood Facebook group, a group he wasn't a member of but apparently could still be discussed in, with a photo of his house and a caption that read, Warning! This neighbor at 4447 Marywood set a trap for kids to catch them trespassing and humiliated a single mother in front of her children. He won't accept any apology. Do not let your kids near this house or this person. The post had already been shared 247 times. The comments were a festival of fury. That's psychotic. She apologized and he still acted like she was a criminal. That's abuse. He called her at 1 a.m. That's harassment. Has anyone reported him to the police? This is clearly unstable behavior. There were more, dozens more. Mitchell scrolled through them, each one a small cut, each one bleeding into the next until he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He tried to post a response, a correction, a clarification. He explained the 2 months of trespassing, the repeated incidents, the security systems he'd had to install. He explained that he'd given them a warning. He posted screenshots of his security footage. The post was deleted within 20 minutes. He tried again with a different account, deleted within 15 minutes. By evening, there was a new post from Corinne's account with the headline, Another Perspective. In it, she'd written a carefully crafted narrative. Yes, her children had made mistakes, but they were good kids who'd gotten carried away one summer. Her ex-husband had recently moved out of state. She didn't mention infidelity, but the implication was there. The kids had been acting out, looking for somewhere to go, somewhere to feel safe. She'd taken responsibility immediately. She'd come to apologize. And he had publicly humiliated her, called her at 1 in the morning like she was a criminal, and refused to accept her genuine remorse. I just want, she wrote at the end, for people to understand that sometimes children make mistakes and good parents work to correct them. I'm not a villain. I'm just someone who tried to make things right and was treated like a monster for it. The post had 8,000 reactions by the time Mitchell saw it. He called his lawyer on Wednesday morning. It's slander, Mitchell said without preamble. She's lying. She's claiming I humiliated her when all I did was answer her knock on my door, and she's portraying herself as the victim when her kids were literally breaking into my home. Do you have witnesses? His lawyer David asked. I have video footage. Of the swimming. Yes, but not of her visit to your house, right? Just her version and your version, and her version is getting more play on social media. Mitchell felt his stomach drop. So there's nothing I can do. There's always something you can do, David said, but it's going to be expensive. And before we go down that road, I want to be very clear about something. The internet is fickle. This story will burn itself out. It might take 2 weeks, it might take a month, but something else will become the scandal du jour and you'll be yesterday's news. Engaging with it, trying to fight it, hearing lawyers to send cease and desist letters, that's like throwing gasoline on a fire. You're just going to make it worse. So I just let her lie. I'm saying that sometimes the winning move is not to play, David said. Keep your head down, don't respond, don't engage, live your life. In a month, nobody will care. But David was wrong, because David didn't account for what happened next. Mitchell woke up at 3 a.m. on Thursday to the sound of something hitting his house. His first confused thought was that there was a storm, but when he stumbled to the window, the sky was clear. The sound came again, a hollow thump against his front door. He grabbed a baseball bat from his closet and went downstairs with his heart in his throat. Through the peephole, he could see nothing. He opened the door carefully. On his porch, arranged in a careful pattern, were 16 eggs. Raw eggs. They'd been thrown at his door, his siding, his window. They were already starting to congeal, starting to dry. A note had been pinned to his doorframe with a pin through its center. Leave Karen and her kids alone, psycho. Mitchell stood there in his boxer shorts, staring at the eggs, and felt something cold and dark unfurl in his chest. He called the police. They came, took a report, assured him it was probably just kids, and that there wasn't much they could do without evidence of who'd thrown them. He called it in as a hate crime, and the officer who came to take that particular statement seemed uncomfortable with the word choice. It's property damage, the officer said, which is serious, but hate crime requires a protected characteristic. You're not a protected characteristic. Mitchell spent 2 hours the next morning cleaning off his house. And while he cleaned, he did what David had warned him not to do. He checked the Facebook group again. There were already new posts. Someone had seen what happened, or claimed to have seen what happened. The details were already getting fuzzy, and had shared it. And of course, the interpretation was that Mitchell had somehow brought this on himself, had provoked it, had been so cruel to Karen Williams and her innocent children that good neighbors had decided to send him a message. There were posts about him planning to move. Someone claimed they'd seen a real estate agent at his house. He hadn't. Someone claimed he'd tried to hit a child with a baseball bat, completely fabricated, but the story had legs. Mitchell sat at his kitchen table on Friday morning and made a decision. He decided that if the internet wanted to build a narrative about him, he would give them a real story to tell. He would give them exactly what they thought he was. And maybe, just maybe, by the time he was done, they would understand that you could only push a person so far before they stopped trying to be reasonable. He purchased the software on his laptop at 11:47 a.m. on Friday. He spent the weekend planning every detail. And by Monday morning, he'd prepared something that he was quite sure the internet had never seen before. Something that would be absolutely, completely, utterly undeniable viral. He didn't know if it would be justice. The second week of August arrived with humidity thick enough to swallow, the kind of heat that makes everyone's temper a little shorter and their judgment a little fuzzier. Mitchell used that week to prepare. He started by researching viral content, not in a casual, scrolling through social media kind of way, but in a systematic, almost scientific manner. He studied the mechanics of what made something spread, what hooks people, what makes them pause mid-scroll and actually watch, what makes them share. The answer he discovered was always the same: stakes, drama, consequence. He also researched Karen more thoroughly than he'd ever researched anything. He found her Instagram account, public, because of course it was. She posted regularly about her life. Workout selfies at her yoga studio. She owned a studio, which explained the designer clothes, family vacations that she'd taken before her husband left, carefully curated photos of her children looking pristine and innocent. There were no photos of her children trespassing. No Instagram stories about the time they'd been caught breaking into a neighbor's pool. No acknowledgement of any wrongdoing. Mitchell looked at these photos, sunny, bright, filtered through Valencia or some other app that made everything slightly dreamier, and felt something crystallize inside him. She was going to keep pretending it never happened. She was going to keep building her narrative as a wronged woman, a devoted mother, someone who tried to do the right thing and been rejected for it. And people were going to believe her because she was prettier and she was more sympathetic and she had better lighting. Unless he changed the script. He talked to a videographer named Ryan, a young guy who ran a YouTube channel about special effects and digital manipulation. They'd gone to high school together, and Mitchell found him through Facebook and sent a careful, vague message asking if he did paid work. Ryan was thrilled. He met Mitchell at the house on a Tuesday afternoon, and Mitchell explained what he needed. "So basically, you want to create a scenario," Ryan said slowly, "and film it in such a way that it looks real." "Exactly," Mitchell said. "Documentary style, hyper-realistic, but everything in the scenario will be controlled by me. I'll know exactly what happens." Ryan looked uncomfortable. That's basically a fake video, that's misinformation." "It's a thought experiment," Mitchell corrected. "A conceptual piece. I'm going to release it as art, not as fact." This was, of course, a lie. Ryan should have called him on it. But Ryan was young and easily persuaded, and Mitchell paid him well, so by Wednesday, Ryan was mapping out camera angles and discussing filming locations. What Mitchell needed was a video that would look like a prank going horribly wrong. He needed it to star actual children, not Coren's children, but children who looked similar enough. He needed to make it look like the kids had come to trespass, like he'd set up some kind of humiliating trap, and like the trap had resulted in something shocking and consequential. Not illegal, nothing that would actually hurt anyone, but something that would make it look, just for a second, just long enough for people to share it before they understood what they were watching, like a parent who'd stolen a neighbor's kids' identities or something equally dramatic. Mitchell felt something dark and satisfying bloom inside him as he explained his vision. They filmed on Saturday morning. Ryan had arranged for 2 child actors from his network, kids who did community theater and YouTube videos for small fees. They were professional enough to hit their marks, young enough to look convincing. The scenario: the kids try to climb the fence and accidentally trigger a tripwire. The tripwire activates a sprinkler system that drenches them. But because of the angle and the lighting, in the first few seconds of the video, it looks like the sprinkler system is actually something more dramatic. The editing, which Ryan would do later, would leave people confused for those crucial first seconds, just long enough to get them emotionally invested before revealing the prank. It was actually quite clever, Mitchell had to admit. It was the kind of video that would get shared with the caption, "You have to see this," without anyone quite understanding what they were supposed to be looking at. The crucial part, the part that would make it viral, was the final element. Mitchell had spent 3 hours on Friday night creating fake screenshots. Screenshots of texts between him and Coren. Texts where he bragged about the prank, where he talked about wanting to humiliate her children, where he called her names. Screenshots where she begged him not to do it, where she apologized profusely, where she offered to pay him to leave her kids alone. None of the texts were real. All of them had been created using Photoshop, a technique that took about 15 minutes to learn and another hour to perfect. But they looked real. They looked like the kind of evidence that would circulate on Reddit for weeks. Mitchell would release the video and the screenshots together. He'd post them on an anonymous account with a caption that read, "A neighbor harassed me and my children relentlessly. When I tried to apologize, he created an elaborate prank to humiliate my kids. Here's what he did. Here are his texts. He is dangerous." The beauty of it was that people would see what they expected to see. They would see the video and think, "Oh, that looks like something dark might be happening." They would see the fake texts and think, "This confirms my suspicions." They would share it before watching the full video, before understanding the prank, before looking closely enough to notice that the sprinkler system wasn't actually that dramatic. By the time anyone figured it out, and they would figure it out, but it would take days, maybe weeks, the damage would already be done. Everyone would already know that Karen Williams had accused Mitchell Chen of being a child-endangering psychopath, and some part of everyone, even after they learned the truth, would still wonder if there was something to it. The internet doesn't forget. The internet also doesn't fully believe in apologies, in corrections, in context. Once the narrative is established, it's very hard to unestablish it. Mitchell understood this on a deep, almost cellular level. They finished filming by noon. Ryan left with his equipment and his payment, and Mitchell sat in his backyard and looked at the pool, still pristine, still uncomplicated in its blue expanse, and felt like he was on the edge of something. He had the video, he had the screenshots. All he needed to do was push the button. Except something kept stopping him. It was Wednesday of the following week, and Mitchell still hadn't posted anything. He had the files on his computer, organized in a folder labeled Insurance, as if it were something he needed to protect rather than deploy. His therapist, he'd called one on Monday, desperate to talk to anyone, about what he was planning, had asked him a question that he kept coming back to. "If you release this video," Dr. Patterson had asked carefully, "what do you think will happen?" "She'll be humiliated," Mitchell said, "the way she's trying to humiliate me. And then people will understand that she's a liar, that she's the real threat. And then," Dr. Patterson pushed gently, "after you get that satisfaction, after the internet has its moment of outrage and turns on her instead of you, what happens then?" Mitchell didn't have an answer. "You'll still be the person who created a fake video," Dr. Patterson continued. "You'll still be the person who manipulated child actors and fabricated evidence. And when people find out, and they will find out, you won't just be the villain in your story anymore. You'll be the villain in a bigger story. A story about how easily the internet turns into a mob and how easily people can weaponize it against each other." "She started this." "She did," Dr. Patterson agreed, "but you're about to finish it in a way that you can't take back." Mitchell had ended the session early and spent the next 4 days in a state of constant internal debate. The video sat on his computer, the screenshots sat on his computer, the anonymous account was ready to go. All he had to do was click. And on Thursday night, staring at his laptop at 2 a.m., knowing that Karen and her children were probably asleep 3 streets over, completely unaware that their entire lives were 30 seconds away from imploding, Mitchell almost did it. His finger was actually on the trackpad when his phone rang. It was his mother calling from across the country. A 2 a.m. call was unusual enough to pull him out of his thoughts, and he answered with immediate concern. "Mom, is everything okay?" "I saw the Facebook posts," she said without preamble. "About you and the Williams woman, are you okay? We've been so worried." Mitchell felt something crack open inside him. His mother, who had always been his advocate, who had always believed in him first and asked questions later, was now worried that he might be the monster in this story. That's how far it had gone. That's how complete the narrative had become. "I'm fine," Mitchell said, and his voice sounded strange to himself, like it belonged to someone else. "It's just a neighbor dispute, nothing serious." "It sounds serious. The posts sound like this woman is saying very cruel things." "She is," Mitchell interrupted, "but I'm handling it." After they hung up, Mitchell sat in the darkness of his living room and looked at his laptop. The cursor was still hovering over the post button. He thought about what would happen if he posted it. He thought about the immediate satisfaction, the brief sensation of victory. He thought about what would come after. He thought about Dr. Patterson's question, and then. And he thought about something his father had told him a long time ago, when Mitchell was 12 and had gotten into a fight at school with a kid who'd bullied him for months. "Revenge is a meal you eat cold, but it's a meal that poisons everyone at the table, including you." Mitchell had forgotten that his father ever said it until right now. He closed the laptop without posting anything. He deleted the video folder. He deleted the fake screenshots. He deleted the anonymous account. He sat in the darkness and tried to breathe, and tried very hard not to think about what would happen next. Because the universe, as it turns out, doesn't care whether you pull the trigger yourself or not. The damage has already been set in motion. And sometimes the most terrible things happen not because we do something we regret, but because we don't do something we plan to. Sometimes the cruelest fate is getting exactly what you deserve, right up until the moment you finally become decent again. The video went viral on Friday morning, but it didn't come from Mitchell's account. He found out about it the same way everyone else did. A text from an unknown number, just a link and the words, "Your pool, buddy." He almost didn't click it, but something in his stomach dropped before he even saw it, some instinct that knew, somehow, that his world was about to change again. The video was his video, the exact footage that Ryan had shot, but the edit was different, the packing was different, and the caption was different. It read, "This man called a single mother in the middle of the night to threaten her kids. When she came to apologize, he set this up. He filmed himself tormenting her children. Here's what a child predator looks like." 12,000 views when Mitchell first saw it, 40,000 by noon, 300,000 by 5 p.m. His phone rang constantly. He didn't answer. His email filled with messages from strangers. Some offered sympathy, but most were the other kind. The kind that started with, "I hope you die," or "the police should arrest you," or detailed, specific descriptions of violence. He figured it out by Saturday morning. Ryan must have uploaded a backup of the footage to his cloud storage, and someone had gotten access. One of Ryan's friends, maybe. Someone who worked with him on his YouTube channel. Someone who'd seen the footage and understood immediately what it was. And instead of being confusing or ambiguous, someone with real video editing skills had clarified it, had cut it in such a way that it didn't look like a harmless prank anymore, had added ominous music, had used the kind of editing tricks that made it look deliberately sinister. By Sunday, the video had gone truly viral, 2.3 million views. News outlets were picking it up. "Local man creates disturbing video of children," the headlines read. "Neighbor's prank goes too far," others offered, with accompanying psychoanalysis about how this kind of behavior signaled deeper pathology. Mitchell tried to post an explanation. He tried to create his own video explaining the prank, explaining that it was satire, explaining that he'd never actually filmed any of this. But by that point, he didn't have a platform anymore. His Facebook account had been flagged for misinformation. His YouTube comments were disabled. Reddit had banned him from multiple subreddits. Twitter was actively suppressing his responses. And Corinne Williams, meanwhile, was giving interviews. She went on a morning talk show. She was crying, authentic, body-shaking tears, as she described the psychological torment, the way Mitchell had specifically targeted her children, the way she'd tried to be civilized and kind, and had been repaid with attempted humiliation. "I'm afraid for my children's safety," she told the interviewer, a sympathetic-looking woman with perfect makeup and a concerned frown. "I don't know what this man is capable of, and the fact that the police haven't done anything makes me feel completely abandoned." The interviewer held her hand. The audience applauded. By Tuesday, there was a petition, "Justice for Corinne Williams and her children." It had 50,000 signatures. There were calls for Mitchell to be arrested, tried, convicted. There were people outside his house, actual people with signs standing on the public sidewalk, asking that he be removed from the neighborhood. The police came by on Wednesday, not to arrest him, but to check on his safety. An officer explained that there'd been credible threats of violence, and they were concerned about the situation escalating. "You should consider staying somewhere else for a while," the officer said. "Friends, family, somewhere with fewer eyes on you." So Mitchell packed a bag and drove to his mother's house in Sacramento. He sat in her spare bedroom and watched his life disintegrate in real time on his laptop. Someone had identified his workplace. His architecture firm was getting calls demanding his termination. His business partners were starting to panic. He'd built the firm over 8 years, and in 5 days, 3 of his 5 employees had resigned. His senior partner, David, different David from his lawyer, called him personally. "We're going to need you to take a leave of absence," David said, and he sounded genuinely pained about it. "It's not that we believe the stuff people are saying, but we can't operate with this level of distraction. Our reputation is being damaged by association." "How long?" Mitchell asked. "I don't know," David said. "Until this dies down, I guess, however long that takes." The truth was that Mitchell had no idea if it would ever die down. He'd engineered scenarios like this before, understood the mechanics of viral outrage, understood that once you were on the wrong side of the internet, you might never get off. He tried reaching out to journalists, offering them the real story. The 2 months of trespassing, the documentation, the truth about the video being a prank that he'd never released, the evidence that someone else had taken his footage and weaponized it. But the story had already been written, and it was much more satisfying than the truth. The truth was complicated and required context. The story was simple. A man harassed a woman and her children, and the internet had held him accountable. It was only on Friday, exactly 1 week after the video first went viral, that Mitchell got a call from his lawyer. "I think I know who did this," David said. "The girl who edited the video." "Who?" "Her name is Zara Johnson. She's a junior in high school, takes film classes, has a YouTube following of about 4,000 people. She posted a follow-up video on Thursday explaining her editing choices. Says she took your original footage because she felt like you were whitewashing your crimes by pretending it was a prank." She basically admitted to the edit. Mitchell felt something cold move through his chest. "So there's evidence. I can take legal action against her for theft, for defamation, for—" "I wouldn't recommend it," David said carefully. "You sue a high school girl for defamation and misinformation, and guess what the headline becomes? Accused predator sues teenager. You'll look even worse. The internet will crucify you." "So she gets away with it." "She's a teenager who made a stupid decision," David said. "But she's also technically right. You did create a video meant to deceive people. The fact that you never released it doesn't really matter to her, or to anyone else. She saw what she thought was evidence of something terrible, and she wanted to expose it. To her, she was helping." Mitchell hung up and stared at his mother's ceiling and understood, in a very deep and horrible way, that he was trapped. If he fought back, he'd look worse. If he stayed silent, the silence would be interpreted as guilt. If he tried to explain, no one would listen. He was caught in a narrative that had taken on a life of its own, and there was no exit that led anywhere good. It was Saturday morning when his mother came into the room with her laptop. "You need to see this," she said, and she didn't look angry. She looked something worse. Disappointed, sad. She showed him a new article. It was from a digital magazine, the kind of place that prides itself on deep investigative journalism. The headline read, "The Woman Behind the Video, Understanding Corinne Williams' Suffering." But as Mitchell read, his confusion grew. Because the article wasn't about the trespassing or the confrontation at the door or any of the recent drama. The article was about Corinne's past, her ex-husband's infidelity, his sudden relocation that had left her as the primary custodian of 3 children with minimal support, her struggle to maintain her yoga studio while single parenting, her daughter's recent diagnosis with anxiety disorder. The article painted Corinne not as a villain, but as a woman who had made mistakes. Yes, she'd let her children trespass. Yes, she'd exaggerated Mitchell's cruelty in her interviews, but who was doing the very best she could in a terrible situation. And it painted Mitchell as something worse than a villain, a man who saw a struggling woman and decided to destroy her. The investigative journalism went deeper. It quoted mental health professionals about the predatory patterns of people who target vulnerable women. It implied that Mitchell's entire campaign, starting with the call at 1 a.m., had been calculated to break Corinne down. Mitchell realized, reading this article, that he couldn't win because no version of the story was true anymore. In the early days, there had been objective facts. His security footage, the documented trespassing, the evidence of his own home being violated. But those facts had been absorbed into larger narratives, narratives that had nothing to do with truth anymore. They had to do with which victim people wanted to sympathize with, which villain they wanted to crucify, which story felt better when you told it. And Corinne Williams, it turned out, was much better at being a victim than Mitchell had ever been. By the following Monday, she'd given a TED Talk about overcoming adversity. She'd started a GoFundMe to help fund mental health care for her children, $42,000 raised in 48 hours. She'd been approached by agents about a book deal. Mitchell Chen, meanwhile, had been fired from his firm via email. His home had toilet paper draped from the trees in front. He'd received a notice from his HOA saying that the way he'd handled the situation with the neighbors was creating a nuisance, and they were considering sanctions. And the worst part, the part that kept him up at night, was that by some metrics, Corinne had won because she'd been crueler more effectively. She'd lied in her interviews, she'd exaggerated wildly, she'd weaponized the internet in a way that had destroyed Mitchell's professional life. And nobody cared, because the internet only cares about the narrative, not about the truth. Mitchell sat in his mother's guest room and understood that he'd lost. Not because he'd done something terrible, though he almost had, but because he'd been caught in the machinery of outrage, and the machinery had ground on regardless of whether he was actually guilty or not. And he realized, in the most painful moment of clarity, that somewhere in the process of trying to make Corinne Williams understand what it felt like to be violated and powerless, he'd guaranteed that she never would. Because she'd already won the game before he'd even known they were playing. The real breaking point came 3 weeks later, not from the internet, but from something much smaller and much more devastating. Mitchell had stopped checking social media by that point. He'd stopped reading articles about himself. He'd stopped trying to explain or defend or correct the record. His therapist had recommended a social media blackout, and it had helped. The anxiety had lessened just slightly. The constant adrenaline spike every time his phone buzzed had started to normalize. But Dr. Patterson also recommended that he return to his home. "You need to reclaim your space," she'd said. "Hiding is just another way of letting them win." So on a Tuesday afternoon, with his mother's worried text messages lighting up his phone, Mitchell drove back to 4447 Marywood Drive. The house looked the same but also wrong. The pool was green, algae had taken over months of neglect. The landscaping had gone wild. There were still signs of the protesters, spray paint on the fence saying "Predator," trampled flowers where people had stood with their signs. Inside, the house smelled like stale air and something else, something sour that he couldn't immediately identify. Mail had piled up by the door. His friends, or people he'd thought were his friends, had stopped leaving messages weeks ago. He spent the evening cleaning. Not the pool, not yet, but the inside of the house. Getting rid of the accumulated mail, opening windows, trying to make the space feel inhabited again. It was 11 p.m. when his doorbell rang. Mitchell's heart rate spiked. The internet had already tried to show up twice. He'd scared them off both times by calling the police, but violence was always possible. He checked the peephole. It was Corinne Williams. She was alone. She looked different from the last time he'd seen her, less polished. Her hair was in a messy bun, her face bare of makeup. She was wearing a t-shirt and jeans, and she looked in some ineffable way broken. Mitchell didn't open the door immediately. "I'm not here to cause problems," Corinne called through the door. "I just need to talk to you, please." He opened it. "Hi," she said, and her voice was small. Can we maybe sit somewhere and talk?" They ended up on the back patio, looking at the green pool. Neither of them sat down. They just stood there, two people separated by the most contentious summer either of them had experienced. "I owe you an apology," Corinne said first. Mitchell didn't say anything.